sorry. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to touch. I'm sorry.
Bloop boop boo. Bloop doop doo. Bloop doop da boo.
Hey, I'm Michael.
Hey, I'm Rameen.
Today we're chatting about Björk's sort of debut album, Debut. So this is her 1993, her adult solo debut, sort of. So before this is her, and this is definitely her international debut solo album. She had earlier albums as part of the Sugar Cubes and other bands. She also had a solo album as a child in 1977. You didn't know this?
I want to listen to it now.
She was really young. Basically her singing like Beatles songs and stuff like that in Icelandic. And there's a 1990 album of Björk with a jazz trio, which is...
I want to listen to that a lot.
There's like an Irving Berlin song in there. Yeah.
Now I know what I'm listening to on the car ride back. Oh, fun update. I am back local with everybody else, so you'll be seeing more of me again.
Exciting. And not through Zoom, so yeah, definitely nice.
It's good to be back.
Back to Björk. Björk said that she was highly influenced by Kate Bush and by the underground English club scene. The club scene is obvious. She wanted to get away from the punk rock sound of Sugar Cubes because she actually felt that that was not as fresh, not where music was headed. Guys with guitars is sort of what she didn't want to be part of anymore. She was highly inspired by this club scene, which is really burgeoning at this time. And this album is really one of the first mainstream albums that is in this style, really. She's kind of making this style available to everyone who's not in the England underground club scene.
Quick context. I know that this is 93. To your point about punk starting to become, in her view, less relevant. When was the grunge movement again? Like
early 90s, yeah.
So because it had already happened by now, right?
Yeah,
that's what I'm getting.
Grunge has been around for at least 5 years at this point, but Nirvana's Nevermind is 1991. It has existed for many years in like the Pacific Northwest. By 91 and 92, it's pretty widespread.
And I think Björk, who has such excellent taste and like awareness of these things, probably sensed that it was sort of just reached the top of the hill and starting to come down. Because if you think about it, she's kind of right.
But then when you get to late 90s, it's sort of the death of rock in a way, but it's not the musician's fault, it's the radio station's fault. But we'll talk about that when we get to 96. This album debut was mostly produced by Nelly Hooper, and he was one of the people who is credited with being one of the inventors of trip-hop. And there's a little bit of a hint of trip-hop in this album. What's your earliest experience with this Björk album?
I had heard most of the singles. Björk was definitely not really in the wheelhouse of the people at the time who would have exposed me to music. When you're that young, you're not turning on your Walkman and picking what you're listening to. So my exposure to Björk didn't really start until late 90s, early 2000s, when I was like approaching my tween years. And as an only child, I didn't have brothers and sisters who exposed me to stuff. I just listened to what my parents listened to. So that was oldies, Motown and 70s rock from my mom, and classic Persian music from my dad. So I say all that to say, the only Björk songs I ever really heard were whatever happened to be on MTV. At that point, they had probably stopped even playing much Björk, but I did hear Big Time Sensuality, for example. They would still play that music video. I didn't really, honestly, start to enjoy Björk until college when I met this person.
I didn't know that I introduced you to Björk.
Yeah, I mean, it's not
but got you into. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought you already liked her.
Yeah, I mean, I liked her a bit. I had listened to some of her and enjoyed what I'd heard, but again, I was a singles-only kind of person.
Yeah. I also did not know Björk at this time. My older brother got into Björk from her second album, and I liked her, and I bought her second album for myself, but I wasn't interested enough to go back to her first album and buy her albums after that until I got a little older myself and more streaming options were available. And then I'm like, oh, I need to buy all this for myself because it's good. Let's say you are handed a bootleg Björk CD. There's no album art. You don't have any of the track titles. You probably don't even have a CD player anymore. I don't. But you put it in something that can play a CD and press play. What are you expecting to hear?
You're asking present me, not first exposure.
Right,
Okay.
present you.
I'm expecting to hear a wide variety of timbres. I'm expecting to hear really wild and interesting harmonic twists and turns. I'm expecting to hear lots of erratic vocalism. I was going to make this point later, but I'll make it now, that to me, Björk at her best is sort of like a master of a primal expression of the fundamental emotion in a piece of music. Mm-hmm. And I think one of several valid reasons why some people aren't Björk fans is that sometimes that's a bit much for people's tastes. The shouty noises, the distortion of the words sometimes into sometimes even not understandable.
For me, what I'm expecting, I am not expecting masterful melodies. I'm not expecting beautiful, quote unquote, singing. I'm expecting to be more interested in rhythms and textures from Björk, especially earlier in her career, which this is. Later in her career, she gets more experimental with harmonies and meter and structure and things like that. But especially earlier in her career, I'm expecting some cool rhythms and textures. And lyrics also. Like, lyrics are something that, if I see a written text of Björk lyrics, I'm not expecting to think like, wow, this is beautiful poetry. That's not what Björk's about, and that's not what she's going for. But I think her lyrics, like her performance, get to something like very simple and primal. She's able to wring a lot from her performances out of simple lyrics.
Right. I'm expecting the unexpected, and I'm expecting to go on an emotional journey of some sort. I'm not always expecting to be, at least in the way people usually use this word, I'm not expecting to be entertained.
I think probably earlier in Björk's career, there's more of that entertainment value, that base level entertainment value, because it's going to make you want to move more. Later in her career, she's going to make you think a little harder for it. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is the influence of jazz on this album. We talked about how she has an album with a jazz trio, and before this album was recorded, she recorded a session of her singing some standards with a jazz harpist, one of which made it onto this album. But I think even beyond just that individual jazz standard track that makes it onto Debut, you can hear Björk's interest in jazz in a lot of what's going on in this album. I wanted to especially talk about how that's happening in the phrasing in the melodies and in her performance, the back phrasing, which is a common thing. This is mostly a dance album, mostly. And so the meters are all very steady, 4 on the floor, everything's in 4. That's the easiest to dance to. But a lot of her melodies and the way she sings them sort of float around that, and they don't necessarily always line up with that cleanly. And I think that's really interesting, and I think that might be because of her lifelong interest in jazz.
The instruments are taking each of their own paces and sort of staying in the same neighborhood in terms of the timing, but it's not as succinct and exact as you might expect out of like a top 40 hit.
I thought before we go into any individual songs, we could go through the 7 criteria that we looked at for each of these songs. I wanted to start by talking about rhythm in general in this album. It's often one of the most intricate parts of this album, but it's not always actually that interesting, and I don't think it needs to be. Often she'll take several simple rhythms and layer them in a way that makes that texture so interesting. So in this album, I feel like the rhythm itself isn't doing a lot of the heavy lifting, but the way the rhythms work together affect the texture in a way that is exciting.
And I will say that for someone who's relatively young in her music production and still discovering her solo aesthetic, already even on this first like true solo production venture, I know that she's not the only producer, but you get my point. But it's really impressive how she's already mastered something as challenging as texture, which is one of, in my opinion, the hardest things about creating music.
A quick side note on production. So Björk co-produced Like Someone in Love, and she solo produced the anchor song. Everything else was produced by Nelly Hooper.
Okay.
So it's really Nelly Hooper making all of these. I know that the two of them co-wrote a lot of the songs together too. So I'm sure that her feeling was translated in his production.
She strikes me as the type who, even at this young point in her career, someone else producing it isn't just her smiling and nodding, right? Like there's probably a lot of dialogue happening across that recording process.
Texture is one of those things that's a little bit tough to explain to non-musicians, I've found. But there's a video coming later this year where I'll be talking about texture specifically after another album review. So look forward to that at some point. But now let's go to performance. What do you want to say about Björk's performance?
I expect this might be a point where we disagree, but we'll see. First of all, I think this is a good performance from Björk. and a good performance from the instrumentalists too, right? I think overall, the performing on this album is quite solid. The one point where I find a bit to critique about on the performance is that to me, it's still clear that Björk is adjusting her vocal technique from that punk place and hasn't quite figured out how to fully express everything she wants at every moment. And I'm specifically talking about two areas, and I'm going to get a little technical in my talk here, but I'm going to try to make sure I'm breaking it down. Two areas where I think it could be better overall. And that's how she handles vowels and how she handles registration. Björk's English is probably way better than my Icelandic. So
Certainly.
like, it doesn't always feel like she's distorting the vowel purely as a choice. Sometimes it feels a bit like a crutch of some sort, and that's related to the issue of registration. So for those who don't know, registration, at least when I'm discussing vocal technique, is how you handle moving through your range. You need to make subtle adjustments in your vowels when you go high and low if you want maximum flexibility. I'll talk about it more later, but there are points in the album where she sort of uses that shouty sound that people really heavily associate with her in moments that I don't think are a choice so much as a requirement. Like either she shouts that note or it's not really going to happen. This is early in her career, and this is a thing that, having listened to other albums, I hear less and less of.
I get where you're coming from, and I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I also think that it's sort of like what we were talking about with expectations. I'm expecting Björk to get a little shouty, especially in this earlier part of her career, coming out of a punk phase like we were talking about. In my extensive research to prepare for this, which was just reading the Wikipedia page, I saw that there were several contemporary reviews of this album when it came out that said, "How dare Nelly Hooper put all of these weird bleeps and blips on this primal force that is Björk." But I think they're only thinking of Björk from the Sugar Cubes, and they're not thinking of her as a solo musician, which is something different. And this is clearly what she wanted, even while she was in the Sugar Cubes, it seems like. We already talked about melody a little bit, but the melody is not often the interesting part of what's happening in a Björk song, especially early in her career. She experiments with melody a little bit more, but even then, her melodies are often very few notes happening, and it's what she puts around it that's the interesting part, and her performance of that simple melody, that's the interesting part. So the melodies aren't super intricate or meaningful in much of this album, but I don't have a problem with that personally.
I think the melodies have enough intrigue to serve the purpose of the album. There aren't many moments where I'm like, wow, that turn in voice leading was really peculiar and cool, but there also aren't really many moments where I'm like, this tune is boring me.
That's what I was saying. I think the fact that the melodies on their own are not like always great melodies is not a problem. And so I still scored melody pretty high almost all the time.
One of the things I appreciate about working with Michael on these reviews is that we tend to share this, in my opinion, you can correct me if you disagree, but I think we both tend to view music in general not from the perspective of maximum beauty or maximum perfection, but rather maximum expressivity.
Yeah.
And how clearly the elements are serving the expression of whatever that song or piece is trying to express. Mm-hmm. And that is why like a 5 out of 5 on melody doesn't necessarily mean it sounds like from either of us, wow, that melody was operatic and glorious. My heart will never forget that tune. It's more, oh, that melody is exactly the right choice for what she seems to be going for.
That's a really good way of putting it. Another one of the things that we talked about is not necessarily being the most interesting in a Björk song is the meter. And so we talked about how this is a dance album. So this entire album's in 4. There are times when it strays a little bit in one of her more composerly tracks, but the songs are in 4, really steady 4 on the floor beat. There's nothing happening with meter, but coming in knowing this is a dance album, I usually don't have a problem with that.
I didn't overall, although I will say toward the end, I was getting a little sick of it, and I am starting to realize that it might not be fair, because if this were a Madonna album, I would be fine with every song being in 4/4. But because it's Björk and because I know what she's capable of and how like expansive her music taste and palette is, by the end of it, I was kind of like, man, I wish that she could have somehow given us like a 12/8 dance song or something, just because I know so few other artists from this period would give you that. Right. I mean, I'm still not mad at it. It's just like, could have been a little better.
It's sort of like when we were talking about Why Can't Tori Read? It's like if someone other than Tori Amos had made that album, we would be like, oh, this is fine, fun 80s power ballads. Right. But knowing that Tori made it, it's like, oh, we expect more from you.
When you do so good, we make the standard higher. Do worse, Björk. Do worse.
Okay, now we can talk about lyrics. And one of the big things that I like about Björk lyrics is that what we talked about, she gets some big feelings across with simple words. Sometimes the simple words are the correct choice to get a really profound idea across. And also, sometimes singing gibberish is the correct choice to just get this primal feeling out of you. People sometimes think, especially at the time, that those were actual Icelandic words that she was singing, and they're not. They're gibberish. They're gibberish that sounds like it comes from Icelandic phonemes. But she talked about in something online at some point that these were things that felt good to sing, sounds that felt right for her to get this feeling across.
I'm glad you said that because I also am a fan of the gibberish. I think that, to your point, sometimes gibberish expresses the emotion better than words do because, after all...
Hey, are you enjoying this video? Let us know by giving it a like. Subscribe if you want to hear us talk more about music, video games, other media, but especially music and video games. The first single from this album is Human Behavior. Some background on it, that timpani line is sampled from a Ray Brown orchestra song called Go Down Dying. I forgot to write down who the composer of that was. I will flash it on the screen here.
I think that the main intrigue of this song for me is the rhythms and how they interact to create a cool texture. Most of the other elements of the song are fairly simple by comparison. I don't mind that because it helps to highlight those rhythms alone. I think if she were to try to throw too many other elements of intrigue, like lots of dissonance in the harmony or lots of like crazy melodic leaps and stuff, I think it would be too much and I wouldn't be able to like settle into it and enjoy it as much. I enjoy the gibberish she employs here because to me this song is about frustration with how people behave and how irrational it is, and I think it makes sense that when you're talking about people being irrational, you stop using words. I think her performance here is really energetic, but as I will go on to talk about later, sometimes it's vocally monochromatic for me just because there's so much of that yelly sound, especially toward like the middle and end of the song, that I would have liked just occasionally a different color for contrast.
I don't know if I completely agree with you, but I get where you're coming from. I think one of the most interesting and necessary parts of this song is the ticka 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 16th notes that are studied through the whole thing. I also really like how Björk's melody doesn't seem to always be in the same place as the chords suggested by the timpani and the synths. It sort of like floats away a little bit.
I think this is one of the highlights of the album for me.
Yeah, definitely for me too. The next single from the album was Venus as a Boy. One of the things that I find most interesting about Venus as a Boy is that this has strings arranged and performed by Indian musicians because she was really into Indian music at this time, and one of her neighbors is the guy playing tabla on the album. But he's like, oh, I know some people back in India who work on Bollywood films. We could hire them to do this.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I think that adds so much to this song.
This is among my favorite Björk songs of all time. Like, it's hard for me to be unbiased in my re-listen of it. I just think the orchestration, the tonality, to your point about like the inclusion of those Indian sounds, it's just all so beautiful, but it still has that idiomatic Björk touch. You know, it's not just a pretty pop song. There's something more, again, idiomatic to it. The rhythm of the vocal line, I love that it starts that sense of rubato. I like that she treats the song with delicacy. When it comes to the texture, it comes to some of her vocalism. If I had to ding this song for one thing, it's this one moment in the refrain where she uses a yelly sound, and I don't think it's intentional. It sort of jumps out of the texture in a way that doesn't really feel like she necessarily wanted it to. But I really like the lyrics of this song too, only because it's a subject matter you don't get often in pop music, and there's a finesse to the point she's making about kind of remarking on the beauty of someone who identifies as male, but not objectifying them either.
I really like how one of the main things that Björk talks about as being sexy about this guy is how he pleases her. And it's not lewd the way she
Right.
says it. It's actually like beautiful.
Right.
The next single from this album is something that's not actually on this album. Play Dead. There are reissues of this album that include it as a bonus track at the end.
Oh.
It doesn't fit. The main reason it doesn't is it's a completely different producer.
Yeah.
It's not Nelly Hooper.
I really, really like that song.
Yeah, she wrote it for a movie, but it's not a movie that I know.
You can tell that it's Björk singing. I don't know if she wrote it, but it
She
feels.
co-wrote it with 2 other songwriters.
Whenever I listen to it, I almost wonder if they were going to offer the song to someone else first.
It doesn't feel like it's necessarily completely her style.
Right. It's just more square than I expect from
Yeah.
Björk, and I still really enjoy it. I think her performance on that song, too, is... She uses that shoutiness to the benefit, but yeah, it's not for this album.
The next single for the album is Big Time Sensuality. Big Time Sensuality. I think it's just okay. Like, it's not a bad song. I enjoy it, but I think it's also part of that like Tori Amos thing. It's like, you have so much better music in you that's too calm still. If this were your only album, I'd probably enjoy this song more.
My one thing about it is I can never tell exactly what she's singing about. Is it about an orgasm? Is it about a budding romance? Is it about something else?
She has said what it's about. The song is about meeting Nelly Hooper. And it's not a sexual thing or a romantic thing at all. It's just like their creative minds working together so well is sexy. But they're not having sex with each other.
Well, I would be more specific. The word sensual, to my mind, just means of the senses.
Right.
And so I don't know if that means sexual so much as like I'm really keyed into my hearing and my like watching and listening as a musician. I don't know.
Okay, the last single for this album is my least favorite of the 5 singles, which is Violently Happy. It's just so straightforward for my taste. I think the one big plus it has is the Mortal Kombat-ish synths that it has going on in it. I think those are fun. My thought about Violently Happy is that it's just so much stuff that doesn't have a lot of payoff. It's just, there's a lot of layering happening, but it's not as satisfying as what happens in the rest of this album.
Every time I go to listen to this song, for some reason, I think I like it and then I don't. Even though I've listened to it several times, and I think it's the title. I go into it thinking, wow, the juxtaposition of the word violent and happy is something I would only expect an artist like Björk to give me. I listen to it and I'm like, oh, that's all you meant? I always think there's going to be some cool Björk metaphor, but then the payoff is violently happy because I love you, and I'm like, really? It feels like she had an idea, but then she doesn't take it to where it needs to go.
You sort of can't talk about a Björk single without talking about the music video for that song. So I want to go through and talk really quickly, even though this doesn't affect our scores, I want to really quickly talk about the music videos for these 5 songs. Starting with Human Behavior. I love this video. It is so great. My favorite part of the video is when the giant moth falls on her plate and you see it over her shoulder and then she looks at the camera and goes...
I'll make this point more later on, but I am a person who likes to create conspiracy theories about how an artist's albums secretly relate to each other. And to me, the character in the Human Behavior video is the same character as in the Bachelorette video much later.
Okay.
I don't know why. I think because like the Bachelorette character is this like isolated in nature character,
Right.
And something about someone complaining about humans feels adjacent to that idea.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just who Björk actually is.
Yeah, I
But
mean...
The next music video, the one for Venus as a Boy, it's so cute. Fried eggs that she is too busy fantasizing about Venus as a boy that the eggs go a little too cooked and she has to start over. Then comes the video for Play Dead, and I don't really remember it.
It's basically just shots from the movie with like Björk, I think, in the rain or something, looking sad and sort of anguished.
But then I think a really good video is the one for Big Time Sensuality. I think it's so fun that she's just dancing on a truck the whole time, and it's like such a cheap video, and it's goofy, but I kind of love that about it. It's very like scrappy in how it was made. Then we get to the video for Violently Happy, which I really hate. I hate this video.
I've never seen that one.
All of the extras in it are in a mental asylum, and it's just like really bad portrayals of mental illness. One of the people has scissors, and every time the person on the screen makes the scissors clap, they put the sound in the song. And I hate that. I hate when music videos add the sound of what's happening into it. Like, I want to hear the song, not that. Now, we don't have to talk about every song of the rest of these songs, but I just wanted to go through and talk about what we do want to talk about, and I definitely want to talk about Crying. Never used to be one of my favorites, but the more I listen, the more it grows on me. I really like how the backing vocals work in this song. Da, da, da. Da, da. I think it's so clever. These all feel like they could be vocal jazz in a way.
I like this song a lot too. I love the bass line, and that's the best part of it for me. It's so infectious. And I think the percussion on this song in general is one of the highlights. I also think that this song's performance is among the better performances on the album, specifically because of the tessitura of the song. There's a certain, I don't know the exact pitch, but there's a certain pitch in Björk's voice where I know, like an area where I noticed she had to use that yelly register. The way she wrote this melody and the key she set it in only has her go to that place a few times. The tessitura doesn't sit as high. Oh, for those who might not know, tessitura is different from range. Range is your...
If this is range, tessitura is like... that, right. And it moves.
The tessitura is the range you are most comfortable in, but when we're talking about in a song, we mean that the tessitura is the general area where that song sits. So even though a song might go from C to C, most of the notes might be between A and C or something.
Like Someone in Love is such a breath of fresh air in this album. In this, she worked with jazz harpist Corky Hale, and both Björk and Corky give really interesting, intimate performances together. Like, they're really locked in with each other and listening. They have a fun push and pull in how they're playing with each other.
Björk's taste in jazz is always so admirable to me. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about the song itself, just because Björk didn't write it. She's covering it. But I love the huge contrast she creates here. I do think, though, that again, that yelly thing is happening, and to point to another specific spot, it's only a few places, but it's whenever she sings "Whenever You're Near." It just jumps out in a way that it doesn't feel intentional.
But I also do really love how, even though it's mostly just Björk and the harpist, there's that swell of strings that comes in, and it's really cheesy, but like the best kind of cheese. Like, it's exactly what was needed in this song.
One Day is not really a standout for me. I don't dislike the song, but what I do like about this song is that it's the first time my ear heard that she was able to access a different color in that higher register. She employs head voice every time, and this is actually a great example if you don't know what I mean about head voice. Listen to Björk singing One Day. Whenever she sings, I can feel it. The word feel.
Yeah.
I can feel. I'm like, finally, where was that in some other places? I think it's just a matter of when you've been singing punk music for years, you're not using your head voice. You're screaming not everything.
Yeah. This is not one of my favorite songs, but there are things that I really like about it. I kind of like that really corny synth line, that ba, ba, ba. I think that the textures in the song are sort of immaculate in how shimmery they are.
I wrote Alien. I like that it's dancey but still has that shimmery, alien-y, whatever you want to call it. It's not just...
Yeah. Like, this is what they play at the club when the DJ knows that everyone's high out of their minds at this point. Everyone's just...
So, Aeroplane, it's not one of my favorites on the album, but I sort of like that it feels like an interlude. There's this phenomenon that happens on pop albums, and I'm talking about the broad term of pop. I don't mean just top 40 pop. Like, I'm including Nirvana even in that.
Right. Molly and I have a video about what is pop, what is rock.
Yes.
They're basically the same thing. Moving on.
But there's this phenomena that happens on albums, and I don't know how to put it other than to say filler songs. And I do think that some albums, including this one, kind of need filler songs. And what I mean by that is it's a song that's not really a single. It doesn't really make a huge statement compared to the other songs. It's that classic thing, right? If you make everything a 10, then nothing is a 10 because 10 is the new 1 now.
Right.
There aren't many clear melodic ideas that you remember. There aren't really many things that happen in the song that are memorable enough for your brain to latch onto them. I will say, however, that this song is probably where my qualms with the yelling are at their peak, because it feels like this song is vocally out of her hands a little bit, like she's getting tired.
This is one of the more specifically jazzy feeling ones because the saxophonist is the one who did the saxophone arrangements for the small ensemble as playing it. But I sort of feel like it's almost as if those were created separate from the song, and then Björk and Nelly are like, okay, now let's integrate them, and they didn't fully get there. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah. I wrote down that the opening is really promising with that jazz flavor, but then it never goes there again.
It does, but
Really.
it repeats it in the middle of the song, but it like smash cuts to it and then smash cuts out.
I guess a better way of saying what I mean is like sort of what you said. It doesn't take that anywhere.
Doesn't
It doesn't develop the
Yeah.
idea.
In the era of listening to CDs, this was always a skip for me.
Right. In the era of Spotify playlists, it's not going on my Björk playlist.
No. But what is Come to Me,
I love this one.
which is like the sleeper hit of this album. I don't hear people talking about Come to Me much, but it is so good.
Björk does hit sometimes on some really beautiful words. My favorite texts on this whole album is, you know that I adore you, you know that I love you, but so don't make me say it. It would burst the bubble, break the charm.
Yeah, those are really, really good lyrics. But also, I think the best melody on the album is that you know that I adore you, you know. Such a beautiful winding line, and part of what makes it so good is that the verses are very little movement. And then after this, getting to that line that Rameen was talking about, it actually settles down. And so don't make me say it. And it's in a tinier spot after this, you know I love you, so don't make me say it.
There are several points where the notes repeat themselves, and there's almost like a recitative quality to it. Really, this whole song, the way she writes the melody just feels natural to the way you would say it, and I think that's really a noteworthy achievement that doesn't often go said about Björk's music.
I also think it was really smart that she brought the Indian string players back in for this song. She talked about how much she loves Kate Bush, and Kate Bush would do the exact same thing, not just use the Bulgarian women's chorus in one song, use them in
Yes.
3.
Yes, and that serves to me a dual purpose of, first of all, more representation, and it's not just, here's my one token song with another culture, but also it makes it clearer to the listener that this inclusion is a choice and not just
Fancy jewelry.
right. There's more intentionality to it, and it makes the album feel more cohesive.
The texture of this song is shimmery and slippery and sexy, passionate and intense, then tender. It does both at the same time. I think this is one of the best bass lines and synth solo lines in the album. The bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, and then the like that. They're so sexy and slinky together. It's such a good song. As I said earlier, the anchor song is the most composer-y song on the album. I want to preface this by saying this is one of my favorite things to say, and when I say it, it is only like 5% a joke. I'm really serious when I say that Björk is the greatest living composer on the planet right now. There's a little bit of tongue-in-cheekness to that, but it's mostly I'm dead serious. And I think that a lot of classical composers could learn a lot from Björk, as she did from them. This song basically has a lack of meter. We were talking about how this album is very four-on-the-floor dancey. Like, there are metric things happening in this, but it's more about the ebb and flow, like a tide rushing in and out, like she sings about in the song. And I think that the way that those two are put together is so interesting.
To your point about composery, the way I express that same sentiment is I could picture someone singing this song on a recital. To me, there's something about this song that feels like minimalism. Not full minimalism, but there's definitely an element to that because it is repetitive, but in a way that feels intentional rather than due to a lack of further ideas or creativity.
The four people in the song, like Someone in Love, they're really locked in with each other. The three saxophone players and Björk don't necessarily have to work always together because it's like Björk, saxophones, Björk, saxophones. But the saxophones are like a perfect unit together the whole time, and they are still playing off each other, just not at the same time. Other thoughts on the album as a whole?
I complimented this album on cohesion earlier, but I do think if I'm going to be nitpicky, that it's not the same level of cohesion she achieves later in her solo work. It sort of feels like there's two albums to my ear that are happening at once. The dance album that we've referenced a lot, but also that more shimmery, esoteric Björk, and sometimes she marries them effectively on this album, but not enough for me to think it's as cohesive as Vespertine or even Post. To that point about dancey songs, again, this is not something I would be saying if I were listening to Madonna, but I'm not. The clubby songs are a little too typical for this era for me to give full points on inventiveness.
That I do want to push back on. When I tried to get into Kate Bush and I gave her Hounds of Love, and she said, it sounds too 80s. It's like, well, no, the 80s sounds too Kate Bush.
Yeah.
And in a similar way, I think club music sounds like Björk. She didn't invent it, but if you compare it to like the hip-hop flavored dance music that was already happening in the US, it's not the same thing.
That's true. I mean, it's hard for me to conceive of time in this era just because of how young I was, and it's easy for me to forget because I was listening to Big Time Sensuality in like 98, 99, which, yeah, it is typical for that era, but because they got that idea probably from Björk and other similar artists.
Yeah.
To your point, really, when we say like hip-hop dance music in early 90s, we mean more like everybody dance now. I can concede that point to you. I can switch it up here on my score too. Look at that. Literally conceding Michael a point. Don't say I never gave you anything.
Speaking of points, let's talk about the score. If you read the Wikipedia article, it gives several major publications what they scored this album. And I converted them all into percentages so that I could average them. And based on what's on Wikipedia and what I saw, not all of these were written contemporaneously with the album. Some of these are publications that were looking back at it and rating it. And usually the later ones are giving it a higher score than the ones who were scoring it at the time, because many of the reviewers at the time kind of didn't know what to do with it, because there wasn't really anything like this. From what I was able to average from everyone else's scores, it seems like this album, critics gave it about an 81%. If we look at what Rameen and I gave the album, we're basically right there. We gave it an 83.
I mean, you know, it's sort of like the same point about if everything's a 10, nothing is a 1. If her first solo album is like her best, usually that does not bode well for the artist's trajectory.
Right. And actually, Björk herself said in some interview at one point that she doesn't really feel super proud of Debut and Post anymore. She likes everything after that a lot more.
And, you know, that's also like just a testament to she's a different person now, right?
She's developing.
Yeah. I mean,
she still is.
Yeah.
Which is other artists who have been making music as long as she has, not all of them are still developing.
I just spilled water all over myself.
Well, we need to cut Rameen off, so let's end the video. Yeah, thanks for watching. Again, give this video a like if you like it, subscribe if you like. To this side is a video that YouTube thinks you might like, so check that out. Down here is more music reviews, a playlist of them, in fact. If you want to check those out, have at it. Thanks, everybody. Maintain your groovy selves.